1863, somewhere in Pennsylvania. The history books tell you about Gettysburg, the grand charges, the lines of blue and gray stretching for miles, the decisive battle that turned the tide of the Civil War. But they don't tell you about the farm down the road, the one where a dozen Union soldiers, cut off from their unit, decided to make a stand in a barn, or the local militia, armed with hunting rifles and a deep knowledge of the land, who turned a creek bed into a deadly trap for a Confederate foraging party. These weren't official battles. They don't have grand names or monuments, but they happened. Constantly. This is the story of the war within the war, the fight for every barn, every field, every well, and how these forgotten skirmishes, popularized in fiction as the Battle of Schrute Farms, actually changed the way the Civil War was fought. The American Civil War was the first modern war, but it was fought across a pre-modern landscape. Armies of tens of thousands moved through a countryside of small farms, dense woods, and isolated villages. These armies were like massive, slow-moving beasts, and they had a fundamental weakness. They needed to eat. Foraging parties, small groups of soldiers sent out to seize crops, livestock, and supplies, were the lifeblood of the army. They were also incredibly vulnerable. And the farmers? They weren't just passive victims. They were defenders of their land, their food, and their families. They fought back, and they didn't fight by the rules. When a dozen Confederate cavalrymen rode onto a farm to requisition pigs and grain, they weren't facing a line of infantry. They were facing an enemy that refused to fight fairly. The tactics of these farm skirmishes were brutal, simple, and devastatingly effective. The ambush from the henhouse. A soldier dismounts, thinking he's grabbing a chicken for dinner. A shot rings out from a hayloft 50 yards away. The shooter's gone before anyone can locate the smoke. The terrain trap. A foraging party follows a cow path into an orchard, only to find the gate behind them has been shut and the path ahead is blocked by a freshly felled tree. Then, the shooting starts from the cover of the woods. The poisoned well. Not with lethal poison, but with salt or animal carcasses. A company's water supply is ruined for days, slowing their march and sowing sickness. The misinformation campaign. A farmer would gladly and falsely direct enemy foragers to a neighboring valley, right into the path of a larger Union patrol. He wasn't a soldier. He was an intelligence asset with a pitchfork. This was a war of squirrel guns against muskets, of local knowledge against military maps. It was asymmetrical warfare, a century before the term was coined. The goal wasn't to win the war in a day. It was to harass, to delay, to inflict a dozen small cuts that bled the enemy of men, morale, and most importantly, supplies. At first, the high command on both sides dismissed these incidents. They were bushwhacking, irritating but not strategically important. But the irritations added up. A foraging party of 10 men fails to return. A scout is found dead in a creek. The army's advance is slowed by a day because local guides can't be trusted. The constant grinding pressure from these farm-level skirmishes forced the armies to adapt. They couldn't just march. They had to secure their flanks. They couldn't just send out small parties. They had to send out larger armed escorts, tying up more men. The armies were learning in blood and frustration that controlling the countryside wasn't about holding ground. It was about controlling the people who knew the ground better than you did. This was the real grinding work of the war, far from the glorious charges at Gettysburg. And speaking of tactical advantages, let's talk about the battle to find the right music. You're creating a documentary about this gritty, hidden side of history. You need a soundtrack that conveys tension, sudden ambushes, and the vast, quiet landscape of war. But finding that music without copyright issues can feel like your own asymmetrical conflict. That's where Epidemic Sound comes in. It's a massive library of high-quality, royalty-free music and sound effects No legal ambushes, no demonetization, just unlimited access to thousands of tracks, from tense, minimalist ambient pieces to the sounds of nature and distant gunfire. Need the sound of a creaking barn door? The tense silence before an ambush? They've got it. Their search tools make it easy to find the perfect sonic landscape for any story. Right now, Epidemic Sound is offering a free trial. Use the link in the description to arm your content. Thanks to Epidemic Sound for sponsoring this deep dive into history. Now, back to the tactical revolution. By 1864, the lessons of 1,000 Schrute farms had been learned. The war had become total. General William Tecumseh Sherman's March to the Sea was the ultimate expression of this shift. It wasn't just a military campaign against the Confederate Army. It was a systematic campaign against the Confederate landscape. He understood that the farms, the railroads, the mills, this was the enemy's center of gravity. His bummers, or foraging parties, were no longer small, vulnerable groups. They were large, organized, and ruthless formations, designed to live off the land and destroy its capacity to support the Southern war effort. The small-scale tactics of the farm defenders had been studied, absorbed, and scaled up into a strategy of national devastation. The rebellion that was sustained by 1,000 barns was ultimately defeated by burning them. So, what is the true legacy of these forgotten farm skirmishes? It's not that they changed the outcome of the war. The revelation is this: the Battle of Schrute Farms is a symbol for a fundamental military truth, that localized, asymmetrical conflict forces conventional armies to adapt or die. These skirmishes were a brutal training ground that proved the limitations of Napoleonic tactics in a modern, decentralized war. They demonstrated that 1. Terrain is a weapon. A farmer with a rifle in a gnarled apple tree could be more effective than a regiment in an open field if he knew how to use the land. 2. Morale is a target. The constant, gnawing fear of a sniper's bullet or a poisoned well eroded an army's will to fight far from home. 3. Logistics are warfare. The war was won not just by winning battles, but by controlling the food, water, and roads that allowed armies to exist. The grand set-piece battles decided the war, but the 1,000 tiny, desperate fights for every barn and field shaped it. They taught the generals that in a civil war, there are no true front lines. The battlefield is everywhere. And the echo of that lesson, that a determined defender on their home turf can defy a conventional army, would ripple forward through history, from the fields of Pennsylvania to the jungles of Vietnam and the mountains of Afghanistan. The Battle of Schrute Farms may be a fiction, but the truth it represents is etched into the very fabric of modern warfare.